Kevin. And for those of you who care, I know you all care, Jeff is actually lecturing this week at a conference in Santa Fe, and so once again you're stuck with me. Yay! Yay! Yeah, but we miss Jeff, don't we?
We're so sad.
I'd like to welcome you all to Astrology Night, the first Wednesday night of every month here in Redmond at SoulFood Books. And we thank SoulFood and the baristas and everyone for giving us this wonderful space to meet here on a monthly basis. This is the first Wednesday night of April 2014, and for those of you who are following astrology on a regular basis, you know that April of 2014 is like month from hell. I mean, it's a pretty crazy month astrologically. And although those of you who know me and know my work, I'm really not a doom and gloomer, there are tremendous opportunities for us here, meaning on planet Earth this month. It is a pretty intense month, and the intensity has already begun. So, I'd like to start a little differently. I'd like to start by reading you something that you may have heard, but it makes particular sense now. This is an excerpt from a Hopi Prophecy, and it goes like this. You have been telling people that this is the 11th hour. Now you must go back and tell the people that this is the hour. And there are things to be considered. Where are you living? What are you doing? Are you in right relationship? Are you in right relation? What are your relationships? Are you in right relation? Where is your water? Know your garden. It is time to speak your truth. Create your community. Be good to each other. And do not look outside yourself for your leader. Then he clasped his hands together and smiled, and he said, this could be a good time. There is a river flowing very fast now. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel that they are being torn apart, and they will suffer greatly. No, the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above the water. And I say, see who is there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment that we do, our spiritual growth and journey come to a halt. The time of the one wolf, and I've seen that the time of the lone wolf, is over. Gather yourselves, banish the word struggle from your attitude and your vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the ones we've been waiting for. That pretty much sums it up, guys. Things are flowing pretty fast now. And I know that some of you who have heard me talk about the Uranus-Pluto square, which is really the background of what's going on this month. Quick review. The planets all go around the sun. We're on Earth. We're going around the sun. We watch the planets go around the sun, but we see them going through the 12 signs of the zodiac. It takes the planet Uranus 84 years to go around once, which means it spends about 7 years in each sign. It takes Pluto about 250, okay, 243 or 244 years to go around once. Which means that every other century or so, Uranus catches up with Pluto, they line up. They lined up like that in 1965 and 1966, when these outer planetary cycles line up or are opposite each other or are 90 degrees to each other. These are times of great cultural, social, political, economic, and personal development, change, growth, and evolution. In the 1960s, 1965 and 66, Uranus, the planet of shock, surprise, revolution, Uranus, the lightning planet. Uranus is called the Great Awakener. Uranus, when it moves through a place in your chart or wherever it is in your chart, is a place where you have the aha experience. That's Uranus. It releases tension that's been stored up and often buried away somewhere. Uranus strikes like lightning, and for a moment we have great awareness. Uranus in the 60s lined up with Pluto, and Pluto is the planet of evolution. Pluto is the slowest moving planet. It moves so slowly, almost like a glacier, that from day to day you can't see that it's moved. But it takes down mountains and forests because it has tremendous force. Pluto is the lord of the underworld in astrology. Pluto, Hades, underworld, unconscious. Everything that's not on the surface, that's not visible, is underground or unconscious or in some other world. And in fact, in the ancient tradition, Pluto was the god of wealth because wealth was kept underground. Minerals, resources, riches. In fact, the word plutocracy means rule by the wealthy. So in the 60s, the planet of evolution and transformation and metamorphosis, Pluto, lined up with Uranus, the planet of shock and revolution. And we know what happened in the 60s. Now, in the 2010s, beginning around 2010, but actually exactly on and off 7 times from 2012 to 2015, Uranus squares 90 degrees to Pluto. And if we look up here on the chart, where we see the Sun and Uranus and the Moon and all the planets around, each in their signs, you can see here Uranus is at 12 degrees of the sign Aries. 90 degrees to it is Pluto at 13 degrees of Capricorn. And opposite Pluto and 90 degrees to the Sun is Jupiter at 11 degrees of Cancer. Well, this month we're going to see a dance that astrologers that I know that have been studying history. I was going to say they've been studying history for centuries, but that makes them sound older than they really are. They've been studying the history over centuries. You know what I mean. They've been studying the history of our culture, of civilization, and every astrologer that I know agrees that we've not seen a lineup, a pattern of outer planets like Pluto, Uranus, Jupiter, and Mars will come into the picture throughout the month, forming what's called a grand square. Right now we have 3 corners of this square, with the Sun and Uranus at one corner, Pluto at another, Jupiter at another, and Mars retrograding back into the 4th corner between now and April 20th. How many of you have heard this dreaded April 20th date flown around? Geez, okay, yeah, a bunch of you, yeah. Well, in astrology, 90-degree angles are angles of stress or tension. They're dynamic, they're creative. They're not always fun to experience, but they manifest with emergent creativity, technology, art, etc. When you have stress, you know the old adage, no pain, no gain? Well, the square is the pain often that creates the gain. It's not always painful, but it's always dynamic. And this ongoing square between Uranus and Pluto, the slowest moving of the planets in this pattern, they moved exactly by degree and minute into square the first time in late spring of 2012. And they line up exactly in that 90-degree angle 7 times because of the Earth moving around on the inside and the perspective changes. And so on April 20th, 21st, it will be the 5th of the 7 alignments from spring of 2012 through the spring of 2015. You with me? So we're at 5 of 7. We've seen, going back to the first one, going back to when first Uranus moved into Aries in March of 2010, which kind of began to activate this whole thing, we saw on the day that Uranus moved into Aries, on the day it moved into Aries, as it does once every 84 years, we had that day the Fukushima earthquake, tidal wave, meltdown. It was like a foreshadowing. We had, when the square started to become more exact, we had the Arab Spring. We had people's revolutions in Tunisia and Egypt, and certainly in the United States. The Occupy began in Madison, Wisconsin, of all places, moved to Wall Street and became the Occupy everything since then. We've seen people's revolutions in Syria. We've seen them in Barcelona, in Spain, in Venezuela, in Indonesia, in Thailand. This is a global phenomenon, like in the 60s it was also. We saw things happening all over the world. You don't have to be an astrologer to get how important these times are. It's obvious by just looking around in our lives, looking around at the economics, at the cultural shifts, at the reheating of the Cold War, which was at its height at the Uranus-Pluto conjunction. Remember, at the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, we had this little thing called the Vietnam War, which was really just it was like 2 boxers in a pen, in a boxing ring. And because of nuclear weaponry, we had basically isolated off this country where then the USSR and the United States duked it out in a safe place that was not either theirs or ours, so to speak. We're seeing now, with what's been going on in the Ukraine and over Crimea, we're seeing the heating up of this Cold War becoming hotter again. The tensions are everywhere. It's complicated. I wouldn't want to be a politician I wouldn't want to be a politician any day, thank you very much. But I think it was Bucky Fuller back in the 60s who said that we were going to see politicians running around the globe in increasing frequency and with increasing urgency, trying to figure things out, but they don't have a clue. They don't have a clue. All right, so now let's bring this back a little bit closer to home and talk about this month ahead, what it means for us personally, and where we're going with all this. Now, I do want to say that of the 7 Uranus-Pluto squares, this one coming up at the end of April is the most dynamic. But it doesn't mean that everything's going to go down in April. Because there's this thing, and I maybe have talked about this here before, but it's called the lag of seasons. It's why the first day of winter, the shortest daylight of the year in the Northern Hemisphere, it's why it's not the coldest day. It takes time for things to catch up. So on the first day of summer, when there's more daylight than any other day of the year, it's not the hottest day. The hottest day lags behind by a month or 2. Are you with me? By the same token, the height of the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in the 60s was in the summer of 65 and then again in the summer of 66. There was stuff that went on during that period of time for sure. But when we look back at the 60s, we see what happened in 67, 68, 69, 70, even 71, before it started to die off a bit. By the same token, even though we're at the height of the action right now, the lag of seasons, if you will, means that it may take a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years even, for us to really understand what went down now. Got it? So, now let's focus on what's going down now. And April kicks off with a foreshadowing of what's to come later this month. Some months we struggle because looking for a theme or trying to figure out what we're going to talk about. This month we can't fit what we need to talk about into an evening. That's how much that's going on. So we're literally going to walk from mountaintop to mountaintop over some big concepts and let some of the smaller stuff that on another month might be our topic is just not that important this month compared to the real, the big stuff that's going on. We start off the month with an annual alignment of the Sun and Uranus. Because the Earth is really going around the Sun, from Earth's point of view, it looks like the Sun lines up with every planet for a day or so. And so from Earth's point of view, the Sun lines up with Uranus exactly today. Today, the Sun is making its once every year alignment with Uranus. When the Sun lines up with Uranus, anyone here born with the Sun or Moon lined up with Uranus? Yeah, a few of you. All right, you're the weirdos, because Uranus is eclectic, eccentric, fast, electric, radical, unconventional. It doesn't fit in. It doesn't want to fit in. It's backwards. It's weird. When the Sun lines up with Uranus, our nervous systems are wired. Anyone have trouble sleeping the last day or two, more so than usual? The Sun lines up with Uranus, and the Kundalini, or the Chi, or the Ki, or whatever you want to call that body energy, is running around our spine right now, and we can feel the electricity, regardless of what sign we are, assuming that you're not on massive doses of Xanax. Anyhow, Uranus lines up with the Sun once a year. No big deal, once a year. However, yesterday, the Sun was exactly square, 90 degrees, 11 degrees to 11 degrees of Jupiter. And Jupiter and the Sun together make up like 99%. I just made that up, but it's a lot. Like 98 or 99% of the mass of the solar system. They're the two biggest things in the solar system. And when they're 90 degrees, remember 90 degrees are conflicts. They're stress, they're tension. However, these are the two biggest, best things in the solar system. The Sun that gives us light and light energy, and Jupiter that's the magnifying lens that says bigger, better, more. Jupiter increases. Jupiter's the ancients called Jupiter the greater benefic. I call him the cosmic good guy. He makes things better. However, when you have the lightest, brightest, most intense, radiant thing in conflict with the planet of bigger and better and more, what might happen? We might become overconfident. We might gloss over the details because we're feeling good. We're thinking it's going to work out. We get a ray of hope. We get a ray of hope that we turn into a lifestyle because we're sure, we're confident. But then, today, the Sun lines up with Uranus, and it's electric, and it's sudden, and it's not quite the way we thought it was going to be. And by tomorrow, the Sun at 13 degrees is lining up with Pluto. And remember, the Sun moves about a degree a day, and right now, Jupiter at 11, Uranus at 12, and Pluto at 13, they're each about a degree apart. But as this month progresses, these slow-moving planets will all coalesce to the same degree. Planets backing into it, because remember, Mars turned retrograde on March 1st. It's retrograde for about 2.5 months, about 10 weeks actually. It turns direct around May 20th, give or take a day. I don't have it right in front of me. But when Mars is retrograde, Mars is closer to Earth than it is at any other point in time. And in fact, Mars is very visible right now in the sky. It's angrier and redder than it normally is. It's opposite the sun, which means that, like the full moon, when the sun goes down, Mars rises. So an hour or two after sunset, if you look in the east, you will see something that's bigger and brighter and redder than you think it should be. That will be Mars. Unequivocally, that will be Mars. However, unlike the fake email that you may get, it will not be bigger than the moon. Anyone get that email again? That goes around every year or so. Okay, so we have this dynamic period of time that begins the month that really is foreshadowing for what's to occur later in the month, which is this dynamic stress. It's the Hopi prophecy of things moving fast, the river running fast. He who holds on to the shore, he or she who holds on to the past, will be torn in half. Because we cannot hold on to what we thought we had, to what we thought we were. This is not like everybody's going to lose everything. It's not that dire. It's stuff is changing. And the more we're willing to confront those places in our lives where we've been resisting change, maybe for months, maybe for years, if we can confront those places in our lives where we can get the deepest, most intense growth. Jupiter, the planet of growth. Jupiter's expansive. Uranus, the planet of sudden. Pluto, the planet of metamorphosis. Now, when a caterpillar becomes a butterfly, we think, what a cool thing. Do you ever think about it from the caterpillar's point of view? Not as pretty. Why? Because the caterpillar kind of begins to produce this liquid that it's never produced, and then obsessively it wraps itself, it covers itself in this, and it hardens into a material that then the caterpillar's trapped in his own fluid that's now hardened. It's dark, the caterpillar can't move. What could get worse than that? Oh, its skin begins to disintegrate. Its eyes begin to melt. It begins to lose its identity. It goes through caterpillar death. And yet somehow the magic of inside the containment of the dark space, inside this cocoon, somehow this post-caterpillar ooze, this protoplasm, something, kind of begins to send signals, and it begins to reform and recreate itself on a higher level of intelligence. And out comes the butterfly, who has to struggle. Do you know if you open up a cocoon and let a butterfly out, it'll never fly? Because it's the struggling that creates the strength in its wings so it actually can lift. We are all, right now, post-caterpillar, pre-butterfly. What's that butterfly going to be like for you? You don't know. We can't know. The caterpillar doesn't know what the butterfly is like. I saw this cartoon once of a couple of caterpillars at the base of a milkweed plant. Butterflies flying by. One caterpillar says to the other, "Man, you'd never get me up in one of those contraptions." The more you fight it, the tougher it's going to be. It's like a death and a rebirth. Remember, Pluto is the lord of the underworld. We're talking Hades. We're talking after death. And it used to be that Saturn was the planet of finality. Death is final. Saturn is the grim reaper. Saturn is the end of the road. It's what you get at the end. However, with the discovery of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, we now know that when it ends, it doesn't really end. Nothing ever ends. You might think of us as radios that are broadcasting a moment in time, but when you break the radio, the broadcast station doesn't go off the air. So, what happens when Uranus squares Pluto is we're like these caterpillars going into a death-rebirth experience. But you see, we have a problem that, as far as we know, the caterpillar doesn't. It's this little thing we call ego. You see, because ego doesn't like to let go. So ego looks at death and goes, hell no, I won't go. Because the ego doesn't want to let go of its control, its centrality, its power. However, if there's one thing we now know about death, it's that it's perfectly safe. Caterpillars do it all the time, and they're reborn as butterflies. So we need to, during this time, we're not just talking about rolling over and playing dead and not doing what you need to do, but we're talking about joining in that river and flowing with it and going with what really is a tide that's much greater than any of our individual stories. You remember the Hopi Prophecy that said, it's not time to personalize anything, especially your own story. It's an interesting little twist. All right. So, we have these first few days of the month where the sun in Aries. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. It's the creative sign. Aries is the baby of the zodiac. It's the I, me, mine. It's an acorn that as it begins to shoot forward, you can't tell whether that green is an acorn or a piece of barley because it's just primordial urge to create. And therefore, it takes a while for it to differentiate. With Aries, the energy is just thrusting forward. It has no idea, nor does it care where it's going. It's just going. As some of you have maybe heard me say about Aries, the energy is ready, fire, aim. It's shoot first, ask questions later. It's just do it. It's the Nike commercial. The original Nike commercial is Aries. It's just do it. So we have the sun moving through Aries until about the 20th of the month, actually until, where'd it go? Until the 19th, when the sun moves into Taurus. We have this sense of pushing forward, this thrust ahead. And yet, over the first days of April, the sun squaring Jupiter, joining Uranus today on April 2nd, and then squaring Pluto tomorrow on April 3rd, really sets up the energy, and then a few days later the sun opposes Mars. That's on April 8th, when the sun, we'll just run this ahead a couple of days, and you can see by April 8th, Mars, which was at 20 degrees, is back to 18, and the sun is now opposite Mars, and so we get the next point in this forming grand square. And I want to run this all the way through to the 20th, 21st, so you can kind of get the sense of this geometry as Mars backs into the Jupiter moving forward, Uranus moving forward, Pluto stationing, holding still, just getting ready to go retrograde later in the month, and Mars backing into it. So here we are on the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th. You can see Mars now getting close enough to form some of those lines with Pluto on one side and Jupiter on the other. And there we go by the 19th and 20th. And you may never see a pattern that strong again. We get that kind of a pattern with, like at a full moon that's squared two faster moving planets. But it's rare when we're looking at Pluto and Uranus, two of the three slowest moving planets, and Jupiter and Mars. These are kind of heavier weight planets. And so it's unusual to have these planets in this perfect grand square. And you can see here that Pluto at 13, Uranus at 13, Jupiter at 13, Mars at 14, but by the next day, then Mars backs into it also. So, what can we expect with this grand square? We can expect that the dynamic tensions that are already in our lives, that we already see at the level of national conflict, we can expect these tensions to heat up even more. Hopefully, we will have, I say we, I mean our projected form of we, the politicians who are running around not quite knowing what's going on. Hopefully we will have the sense to talk our way through this without doing anything that we will later regret. The same thing is true in our personal lives. That this is a time for action, but it's a time for considered action rather than impulsive, misplaced aggression. You see, when a planet's retrograde, it gets closer to Earth. Mars moving retrograde as it goes opposite the Sun on April 8th and throughout this month, Mars is on the same side of the Sun as the Earth is. And so Mars looks brighter and redder and angrier in the sky because Mars, the god of war, the god of aggression, of assertion, of combat, Mars is closer to Earth. What does that do? It makes us angry. And if we're angry and things are big and we can't deal with them, I mean, if my life is going on and it's a mess and there's things that I can't possibly make right, and my boss at work has been kind of beating on me, I don't mean physically, but, kind of on my case, and I got this going wrong and whatever, I'm going to be frustrated and I'm going to be angry, but I can't take it out on my boss because I don't want to get fired. So I find someone safe to be pissed off at. Like a spouse, or parents or kids or whatever, because they can't go anywhere, and or they can, and that can be part of what the problem is here. Is we also may see shifts in relationship dynamics that have gone on too long, holding on to a status quo, and now it's time to do something about it. I'm not saying that this is a time to hold your breath. That would be holding on to the shore. It's a time to actually move with the change, but it's also a time to not impulsively and unconsciously lash out at a convenient target or a safe target that's the wrong target. In fact, lashing out and being angry and fighting is not necessarily the most intelligent use of Mars in Libra. Why? Because Libra is not a combative sign. Libra is a sign ruled by Venus. Libra is the sign of relationship. Mars retrograde in Libra is not about going in guns blazing. It's actually going in with a chessboard and saying, let's sit down and play this out logically and see whose ideas are better. Mars in Libra is about strategy. I like to think of when you have Mars in Libra, it's like martial arts because of the art side, the Venus side. It's about the art, the Chinese book, The Art of War. It's not just about who has the biggest guns or the biggest whatever. It's about logically negotiating, allowing for both sides of the relationship to be heard so that growth can occur. And if that happens here, then there can be breakthrough. Remember that Uranus, that lightning striking, it's like an electric shock that releases the tension. So if it can be done right, wow, I never thought of it this way. It's not just this or this. It's not just you or me. What if we do it this way? New idea, breakthrough. And it's Pluto. It's a gradual upheaval, transformation. It's letting go of the control of what's on top and equalizing, making those things which are the most important less important. Nietzsche called that nihilism, by the way. And with Jupiter involved, there's a sense of the opportunity here. There is potential here. Jupiter is in Cancer. This is about the potential of emotional growth. In Cancer, it's about home and family. So this is, if there's only one thing to take away from tonight, it would be this. Oh, and the two eclipses. All right, let's talk about the upcoming new moon and full moon, because this date of April, it's actually April 20, on April 19th, the Sun moves out of Aries and into Taurus. On April 20th, Jupiter squares Uranus exactly. I mean, these are all the Uranus, Jupiter, Mars, and Pluto, and even the moon on the 20th lining up with Pluto. These planets are all close enough to be buzzing for a day or two or three on either side of this. But the exact square between Uranus and Jupiter is on the 20th. And on the 20th also, Jupiter exactly opposes Pluto. And it's not until the 21st that Uranus exactly squares Pluto. So we have that 20th and 21st when this is all kind of tied up in knots, with Mars moving backwards over that point over the 22nd and the 23rd. So that's that scenario. But here's the interesting thing. In astrology, new moons and full moons are like, they're like the tick-tock of the clock. They're like the high tide, low tide. They're the timekeeper of the, of the cycles, if you will. We have a full moon on April 15th. And let me back this up just enough to get this close enough. There we go. 25 degrees, 25 degrees. And let me aspected points, add the moon back into this. No angles. Okay. All right. So now we have the moon at 25 degrees of Libra, opposite the sun at 25 degrees of Aries. This is on April 15th. The full moon on April 15th is actually just moments after midnight, exactly here in Seattle. So it's just at the very, very beginning of the day of April 15th. And when you see these little points here, these things that look like headphones, these are the nodes of the moon, north node and south node. The nodes of the moon, the Vedic astrologers, the Eastern, the Indian, Hindu astrologers, call the nodes of the moon shadow planets. Why? Because they're planets, but you can't see them. So what is it that's there? The moon goes around the Earth. Meanwhile, the Earth is going around the sun, where the orbit of the moon going around the Earth intersects the orbit of the Earth going around the sun. That creates 2 points, or a straight line. The nodes of the moon are where the orbit of the moon intersects the orbit of the Earth around the sun. It's a magical place. It's a real mathematical point, and it's where the show begins, if you will. It's how things that seem to be physical, material, it's the illusion that seems real. That everything that seems solid, and it has to do with how these waves intersect with each other. So here's the deal. The ancients have known for thousands of years that when the new moon or full moon occurs very close to the nodes, there's an eclipse. Why? Because the plane of the Earth going around the sun and the moon going around the Earth, when they are in alignment, when the Earth and the moon and the sun are all lined up, if it's a new moon, the moon blocks out the sun. If it's a full moon, the Earth blocks out the sun to the moon. It casts a shadow on the moon. So we have a full moon eclipse that will be visible here in Seattle, assuming we can get rid of the clouds for an evening, just after midnight. The beginning of the day on the night of April 14th, the beginning of the day on the 15th, the full moon in Libra opposes the sun. Eclipses turn the energy. They're Uranian in as much as like it's lightning. Often it's like flip back to the past to the future. With a full moon eclipse, we often need to give up something. And the solar eclipse, the new moon eclipse on April 28th, basically contain this whole grand square event that we've been talking about. Oh, let's go back to this data time. So that this grand square event has an eclipse a week before it and an eclipse a week after it. Eclipses are about change. They're about sudden change. They're again about releasing tension. A solar eclipse, when the moon is lined up with the sun, and this solar eclipse will be in Taurus because the sun has moved on into Taurus, and the solar eclipse on April 28th occurs at 11:14 p.m. here in Seattle, which means it'll be early on the 29th if you're on the East Coast. But we will not see this eclipse. Why? Because it happens at night, and the moon comes between the Earth and the sun, so it will not be visible here. Nevertheless, this eclipse, I think, is really important because it takes some of the pressure off the stuff that's been building. It initiates a new cycle. An eclipse is a new moon. Every new moon begins the next cycle. And this new moon in Taurus is moving the energy away from the cardinal signs. The Aries, these are the season starting signs. Aries starts the spring. Cancer, Jupiter in Cancer starts the summer. Libra, Mars in Libra starts the autumn. And Capricorn, Pluto in Capricorn starts the winter. Well, on April 19th, the sun moves into Taurus, and then at the new moon the following week, actually a week and a half later, on April 28th, that sets the ticker to begin this new cycle, but it's not in cardinal signs. It's in Taurus, which is a fixed sign, and on top of that, the aspects to this new moon are lined up with Mercury, and they are also, you see these blue lines that are connecting now to the points on this grand square? Well, if the red lines, which are squares and oppositions, are tension, stress, conflict, the blue lines are easy flowing energy. Unlike that poor girl in the back. Not happy. That's squares, not trines. So the trines and sextiles, these blue lines, from the sun and moon and Mercury to Jupiter, and the sun and moon and Mercury up here to Pluto in particular, they take the pressure off. There's a way in which we can take the craziness, the transformation, the upset, the uncertainty, the excitement. This isn't all bad news. This is exciting. And if you wanted something to do, April is your month. You got something to do every minute, every hour, every day, every week. It's a buzz month. But once we hit this new moon eclipse in Taurus, I think we'll actually be able to go. Now that doesn't mean we'll be able to go to sleep, like a real Taurus would like to do. Jeff, who's a Taurus, says when the going gets tough, the Taurus goes for a sandwich. There's that something about taking care of the senses. But I do think that this eclipse is actually an important eclipse because it really does help us ground the energy. Where are we? A couple of other things that I want to point out this month is we talked about the full moon. A couple of planets change signs. We talked about the sun moving into Taurus on April 19th. We have Mercury that moves into Taurus. Well, let's get back here to do this a day at a time. All right, so we have the sun in Aries, Mercury in Aries. Uranus is in Aries for 7 years. Uranus moved into Aries in March of 2010. It's there through 2017. So it's the slow wait, so to speak. But on the 19th, the sun moves from Aries into Taurus. And then on the 23rd, Mercury moves from Aries into Taurus. And that kind of begins to set the tone so that when the moon comes through and joins up with them on the new moon eclipse on the 28th, we're really getting this Taurus energy. It's really helping us find a place to stand. It's helping us now follow through on those great ideas and on the things that we had to deal with back in April. And I think it's really important that we think as we move toward the end of April, it's how do we make things, how do we stabilize the changes that we've already seen. Now remember, the Uranus-Pluto is not complete. We get a sixth one later this year in November, I think, and then we get a seventh one next year in March, in 2015. And then there'll still be follow through, and ramifications after. But the fact is that we may feel by the time we get to May like it's really time to take a breather. And I would suggest that we remind ourselves, rather than putting our feet up and relaxing, that we actually think, now the work begins. How do we make it real? How do we take those things that we've gleaned out of the last month or even out of the last few years of change, and how do we begin to stabilize the energy so that we can hold on to it as we move into the future? We can look at things globally. We can look at the earthquakes. I get emails from the USGS, the United States Geological Survey. And anyone can do this. It's a free service, and you can set it up however you want. I get an email, any earthquake in the United States that's 3.5 or greater on the Richter scale, or 4.5 or greater outside of the United States, I get an automated email that just has the latitude, longitude, the time, and the intensity of the earthquake. I'm an astrologer geek. I like to have this information. There's been a buzz over the last few days. LA had a series of quakes over the last few days that pushed 5.0, and that there were several pre-shocks and aftershocks that have been around 3.5 to 4. There have been earthquakes up in Alaska. There was an 8.0 or 8.1 yesterday evening off the coast of Chile that produced a tsunami. I'm sorry?
It was 8.5.
8.5. These things get corrected and recorrected.
Sorry.
There's been rumblings off the coast of Japan. We will see as we approach eclipse season. Eclipses often see an increase of seismic activity, but it's not lost on me that we had yesterday and today and tomorrow the two heaviest masses, greatest masses in the solar system, the Sun and Jupiter, at 90-degree angles pulling, with Mars pulling opposite and Pluto pulling the other way. And I would imagine that we will continue to see seismic activity over the next few days, and then again as we approach the eclipses mid-month and toward the end of the month. But what I'm trying to say is that even though there's economic crises out there, even though there's nationalistic, militaristic meltdowns, even though there's accidents, there was a shooting at Fort Hood this afternoon that is very much a Sun-Uranus. There's shootings, unfortunately, all the time in this country, or often. But on a day when the Sun conjuncted Uranus, to have a multiple death shooting on a military base is something that has that releasing pent-up tension that Uranus does, that weird, radical, crazy, kind of like shocking. So we see these things around us. We see the posturing of the big powers and their militaries. However, I would like to remind all of you, as I remind myself, that whatever is happening globally is a projection and a reflection of what's going on in our personal lives. That the way we can handle these huge issues out there is by handling our personal issues in here. That by changing our attitude, by changing our lives, by adjusting the pieces on the chessboard in the relationships and the dynamics that we have in our everyday lives, This is where we make change. And if enough of us do that on an ongoing basis during stress times like this, then the outer changes are manifest with greater ease. So I come full circle and I ask you each, as I ask myself, what in your life is holding you back from what it is that you want to be, need to be, should be, could be? What patterns do you kind of keep going because you feel safer if you hold on to this part of your life or this shore? As the river picks up speed, what's it going to take for you to let go and push out into the middle and then kind of steer or navigate your way rather than worrying about what you're going to hold on to? Where in your life can you make these kinds of changes where you can jump into your life and actually make things happen? I like to say, and you've maybe heard me say this before, it's better to be the lightning than to be struck by the lightning. And if we hold in our tensions, if we act out of fear, if we bury our emotions that are difficult or complicated, if we push them in and down, it's like a metaphysical invisible lightning rod goes up, 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 up and says, Pluto, Uranus, we got a problem. And it's like a lightning rod that will attract events. Whether those events are an accident, which is actually really a purpose. Its purpose is to release the tension that we don't want to deal with. So the question is, how do we preemptively move that energy? How do we use our breath to keep the chi, moving rather than holding our breath out of fear that we might say something or do something wrong that might upset someone else? Better to be the lightning and upset someone else and to deal with those ramifications than it is to hold your breath, hold your entire body in a state of fear and attract that lightning to you so that you end up getting struck. These times are great times. There will be changes. And the more that you can do preemptively, the more that each of us can do preemptively, the better off we'll be. Is everybody feeling this out there, or am I just like standing here on edge by myself acting crazy? Don't answer that. And last thing, thank you to Kevin and Makia and to whoever's baristaing tonight, Tyler, and I think I saw Aaron was somewhere back there. Wait a minute, someone has an important announcement.
It's your birthday this week, right? Happy birthday, dear Ben. Happy birthday to
Thank you all, and my birthday. Thank you all. My birthday is on Sunday, and I will no longer be able to sing when I'm 64. And good luck this month. What was the Hill Street Blues when they used to head out on the street?
Be careful out there.
Be careful out there. It's one of those months. It doesn't mean that any one of us are in any specific danger. It just means it's good to pay attention. It's not about being fearful. It's about being part of the flow, about going with the river and trusting that we're in this to get to the sea together. Thank you all.